and I open my eyes and I'm like flying through the air like Dukes of Hazzard style. And of course, that's how you wake up and you're just, so I hit the brake, like that's going to help. And so I hit, just instinctive. So I'm flying through the air. I hit the ground. I start bouncing, like the car's bouncing.
Welcome to When You Look, where ordinary people share their extraordinary experiences, and you get to decide, was it coincidence or God? Shelby, welcome to When You Look.
Hey, thanks for having me. So appreciate
it.
Really,
really glad to have you here. For sure, man. Great to have you on. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a devout Christian. I'm a musician. Pretty much my life revolves around those things primarily, God first and then music second. And then, everything else kind of falls in after that.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your nickname though, because you're more than just a musician. You're kind of a specific type of musician.
Yeah. I'm a drummer, and a friend of mine jokingly called me Beatbox Brown many, many years ago, because Brown is my last name. So he would call me Beatbox because of me being a drummer. It's funny when I tell people about it, they ask me if I actually beatbox on my mouth, and I'm like, no, I'm a drummer. So.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. Well, great to have you here. I know you've got a number of stories that sort of span across your life, literally from time as a kid all the way up through current day. So let's just start with you as a kid and walk us through some of these stories.
Yeah, sure. When I look back on these, all the way going back to when I was a kid, God's hand in my life and my protection, or his protection in my life, it does start back, when I was younger. First one, I was 6 years old, and I grew up in West Virginia, and I lived in this house that had a door that had, like a glass screen door, if you will, instead of a screen. And, I was in my house. It was summertime, so I was playing in the kiddie pool. And so I came in the house and I was all wet. My mom's like, get out of the house, you're dripping wet. So I turned and I ran. And when I would run out the door, I would hit the handle and the door would just bust open and I'd go out. Well, this time the door didn't open. So I went head first through the middle pane of glass. And I was over the glass, a big chunk. And when I pulled myself back out, I just thought I was wet. I went in the house. My mom, of course, ran up and was checking me out, making sure I was okay. And I felt something dripping down my arm. And when I lifted my arm up, my whole arm just opened wide open. And every time my heart would pump, blood would like shoot out of my arm like a spigot, And of course, I was like 6, so I panicked, and my mom was there, ran up, and she grabbed my arm and kind of wrapped it over and held it to stop the bleeding. And my dad was at work. They had to call, instead of calling the ambulance, my dad was closer. So my mom called my dad. They rushed me to the hospital. They get me in. A guy puts like a dry gauze around my arm to stop the bleeding. So they had to rip that open again because it dried on my arm. So that was more pain. They put me on a gurney. The whole gurney was soaked in blood, so much so that they had to pick me up and move me to another gurney because I was laying in just a whole gurney of my own blood. They basically had me in surgery for, I don't even know how long. It was long enough to stitch everything up. They had to put the artery and everything back together. Took 186 stitches. There was this awesome nurse who was there the whole time because they had to make my mom leave because when they tore the thing off my arm, she like freaked out and grabbed the doctor and was like, and they're like, get her out of here because. So they made her leave, and so my mom and dad could stay outside the door and watch what was happening, but they wouldn't let her come in because she kind of was doing the mama bear thing, trying to protect her. So this nurse, every time I would turn my head to look to the right, I'd see my arm just wide open and I'd freak out. And so this nurse was so sweet. She was there the whole time with me, look this way, don't look over there. And so they got me all sewed up. They let me go home the next day, but I had my arm in a sling and I had to keep my arm above heart level because the blood would flow down there and the stitches would actually explode out of my arm. So I had to have my arm held up even to sleep so that I could, rest. So yeah, I came very close to bleeding to death, and it was pretty eventful. Again, there's more details in there that like little details I could keep here for another half hour with all the stuff, but that's kind of the meat of the story, if you will.
So let's just do kind of a quick recap of that, because there was a lot there.
A lot. Yeah.
So you're 6, you're having fun playing in the pool. You come in all wet. Mom says, hey, hustle back outside. And the next thing you know, you have gone straight through the glass in the door head first. And as you pulled yourself back out, your arm either got filleted on the way in or filleted on the way out.
Yeah.
And it was quite perilous after that. So 186 stitches later. I mean, is there anything else in that story that kind of talks about how close it came to being a even more of a catastrophe than it already was?
Well, it's funny because, like if my mom wouldn't have been there, I would have bled out in probably like 3 or 4 minutes tops, maybe even less. I don't know. Because literally every time my heart pumped, blood would shoot like halfway across the room. It was like something out of a movie. So, wow. Mom being right there, and I've told people this, when I tell this story, I've said Jesus and my mom saved my life that day because, as a kid, my heart was pumping a million miles an hour because I was panicking, of course. I would have bled out fast. And just her being able to keep her cool during that was just crazy. I mean, she's watching her son literally bleed to death, and my dad he got us to the hospital in like record time. It took like normally 45 minutes to get to the hospital, and he got us there in like 15 or something. Which is great. And then just, the provision of being able to get everything lined up to where they could do the surgery and they're able to repair the artery and the whole bit, without a hitch, which is just, again, I could have lost my arm. I mean, they said not only, could I have bled to death, but I could have literally cut my arm off. Another little side note with that too, the top pane and the bottom pane were plexiglass, and the pane I ran through was actual real glass. They hadn't changed the real glass over to plexiglass yet. So the doctor said that if it would have been plexiglass, it would have cut my arm off.
Well, it's praise God, man. You still got the 2 arms because as a drummer, that goes a long way.
Yeah. It does. That's the thing. So that's the first story, of when I was a kid. Of course, there's many others when I was a kid where like I look back and I'm like, how am I even alive? I mean, it's by the grace of God that I am alive, with many instances, but that's a very big one.
Yeah. Well, one of those other instances you mentioned was when you had at one point those 2 arms that you still have, and even today you still have them, but they were on a steering wheel. So tell us that one.
Yeah, I was in a band in 1996 and 97. And I used to have to drive about an hour to get to rehearsals. So we would rehearse on Saturdays, and then at the time we were working on an EP. So we would rehearse on Saturday evenings, and then we would drive from Virginia to Maryland to record all night in a studio. And then I would drive back to their place with the band, and then I would leave from their place to go back to my place to go to church on Sunday mornings at my church. So we had been in the studio all night, just burning the candle at both ends since we had rehearsed, and then we did the studio. And so I get back to the band house. It's probably about 6 a.m, something like that. And I take off to go home. So I'm driving this giant green 1977 Buick Skylark that the same friend that nicknamed me Beatbox Brown he nicknamed it Tank. So that's what we used to call it because it looked like a big green tank. So I'm driving home. It's like 6 a.m. Once I get off the major highway, I had to get on to basically a non-major highway to get to my place. So no cars around, nobody. Again, it's Sunday morning, like 6 a.m. So I'm
and you've been up all night, correct?
All the day before, and then all night, recording, doing stuff in the studio. So I'm exhausted. So I'm driving, not wearing my seatbelt as I should have been. So when I'm rolling on, this is like late '90s. So I'm 18 years old. I'm like, whatever. I'm just gonna go. So I'm driving, and the next thing I know, I'm out. So like I remember hearing myself like run off the road, and it was just kind of like I could hear myself hit the gravel, and it was just the next thing I heard was like this boom. It was like boom, and I opened my eyes, and I'm like flying through the air like Dukes of Hazzard style. And of course, that's how you wake up, and you're just So I hit the brake, like that's going to help, and so I hit,
Right.
yeah, right, just instinctive. So I'm flying through the air. I hit the ground. I start bouncing, like the car's bouncing. It's a miracle I didn't just bounce the wrong way and just barrel roll on the side. I come to a stop. I'm probably white as a ghost. I'm like looking around, white knuckling the steering wheel, and there's nobody's around. So I kind of compose myself a little bit, and then I slowly pull out on the road and I drive out, but the thing that made that, besides the fact that, I fell asleep at the wheel, and I was probably doing about 70 miles an hour when I hit the embankment. That was the only open spot the whole way home for like miles and miles that I could have hit, that gave me the opportunity to not slam head on into like a whole bunch of trees or a gas station or a house. It was the only open spot on that road that I can remember that was really a long open spot. And right beyond it was a gas station. So I
Wow.
hit in the right spot basically in order to be able to survive, because if I would have gone over before, at the least I would hit a guardrail, which could have ricocheted me out into who knows where. And there were other spots too where I would have like flown down into a whole like gully of trees, or an actual gas station. I would have hit a gas station or a house, because there were houses lining the road too. So that was intense. So,
I'm sure, to say the least, right?
yeah, it was pretty crazy.
So what did the car land in then when you touched down?
I was still like at the embankment. The road was here and the embankment kind of went up. It was like a grassy hill. And when I hit the hill, I hit it at a sideways angle. And when I was landing, and I was bouncing kind of off the hill and the side of the road. So it was still that long stretch of that I landed on. Pretty much the only clearing that I can think of where there was nothing there. And the only thing that happened is I got a little dent in the back of the car.
So the car's airborne, you land with multiple bounces, and you're okay despite not having a seatbelt on, and the car ends up with a dent, like it sounds like a small dent in the back. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it was a dent back by the rear wheel.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
crazy. So, now when I'm driving, if I even get slightly tired, I got the windows down, I got the radio on, whatever I got to do, I'm super aware of it because, I survived that once and don't want it to ever happen again.
Yeah, it sounds like that one left a mark.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is, it's like, again, it's just another provision of God keeping me alive. I've said that many times. He must have a purpose for me in certain areas because I've dodged death a bunch of times. There's other stories I could keep you here with, which is crazy. But that's
we'll have you back on at some point. Glad to do that.
But yeah,
but tell us a little bit more about some of the other stories that have happened later in life.
There was a story that happened where, again, just needing God's provision, financially. I was in a spot where I just, I had paid kind of all my monthly bills and, was really just kind of at the end of what I had. And I was trying to figure out like, what am I going to do here? I'm kind of in a bind. And, so I'm sure I prayed like, Lord, get me through or something like that, and I went out randomly to check the mail and I got a letter from a bank that I used to bank with. And I guess their system had been hacked. Like years before. Like I'd totally even forgot. I'm like, did I even bank with these people? I totally forgot about it. So I opened this letter and I read this heading that says, we're sending out reimbursement checks for people's information that may have been hacked. And it was a $250 check. It was just random, just had no clue that it was going to be there. Like I said, I think I might even forgotten that I had banked with this bank because it was so many years before. And, it was almost 10 years, something like that. And there was a $250 check just randomly plopped into my mail, that more than provided what I needed to get through till my next payday.
Yeah. Yeah. Speak a little bit more maybe about the significance of that, because it sounds like you were very close to the end of dollars and that 250 mattered quite a bit, but you tell us.
Yeah, it was like I was very much near the end of what finances I had to last me at the moment. And I didn't know what I was going to do for basic gas money to get back and forth where I needed to get to the course of that week. So yeah, I would have really, I would have had to try to borrow it from somebody or just something of that nature. But, there's no guarantees with that because, times are tight, people were hurting. And yeah, I mean, it gave me way more than what I needed to get to the next payday. Because like I said, I wouldn't have even had gas money, because I had spent pretty much all that I had at that point with bills. It was a really tight week, things like that. So yeah, again, it's just God providing the money to survive, just to be able to get back and forth to work and, have money for food and things like that. So yeah, it's very, very important, especially coming out of the blue. You have no idea. I mean, this is like 8-10 years in the making, to get to me, but it came right when I needed it.
Yeah. Right when you needed it. So tell us why you think that wasn't a coincidence.
Well, the timing, I mean, that's a big, big thing that God has shown me over and over again in my life is the timing. I'll have a need and it's just the timing is too perfect to be a coincidence because, okay, I have a need right now and then the need is met within a day or even the same day or within a couple of days. I don't believe in coincidence. I don't, the timing is too correct. You know what I mean? So
I
that's why I
understand.
believe those kind of things are God, you know? So, and again, with each story, it's the timing of things, like going back to the first one, if all the pieces wouldn't have been in place with my mom being there and, the doctors, being there and everything, my dad being able to get me to the hospital. I mean, the timing was perfect. I would have died had it not all lined up. So same thing with the car. If I would have hit anywhere else on that road, I would have hit something solid, which without a seatbelt on probably meant going through the windshield. So the timing of just that right spot on the road is where I hit. If I would have fallen asleep 10 minutes earlier, you know, at the least I would have been mangled. I would have been dead for more than likely. So again, I just see that as God providing and guiding me, and just putting his hand on my life and saying, okay, I'm going to lead you here. I'm going to lead you here, and I'm going to provide. And he does, So I try, that's the big thing he's taught me in my life is that when something happens that seems like it's bad in the moment, I try to take a step back before allowing that to settle in and be like, oh, this is terrible. I try to remember the times that he's taken what looks like a bad situation and turned it around and turned it into something really good. So I try to keep hold of that. And that's straight out of the Bible. If you look at, things that happen to biblical figures, they went through some pretty heavy stuff. And then years later, it's like they could see, I think it was Joseph that said that, to his brothers, you meant this for bad, but God turned it around for good. All the stuff he had to go through. I'm sure in the moments he was like, what is going on? But years later, he looked back and could see, okay, that had to happen. And then God turned it all around for good. So
Indeed.
For me.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for the explanation there. Well, you were talking about timing being very important and how timing for you is what makes things not a coincidence. And then just recently, timing has played a clear role in sort of another brief story. So close us out with this last one from just recently.
Sure. I was in a band that I was in for 3 years, kind of put my heart and soul into the band, and things just didn't work out. And I had been thinking about leaving the band. And even before I was thinking about it, I was putting feelers. While I was thinking about it, I was putting feelers out there and whatnot, trying to see what I should do and asking God, lead me and please tell me what I should do. And ended up, I felt like the Lord told me, like, okay, it's time for you to move on. Just go ahead and do it. Even though there was doubt I was doing the right thing. And during that time, I felt like he was telling me that I had a friend of mine from another band reach out even before, to the point where I even asked him after the fact. I'm like, did you know I was looking for another band? He reached out to me and was like, hey, we need a drummer. And I'm like, okay, how does he know this for sure? So I'm like, well, he's like, but you're in a band. And I'm like, well, that might be changing. So, a week or so went by. It wasn't even confirmed. It was about a week or 2 weeks went by. And then, I ended up leaving the band, which I felt God told me to do. And I even asked him, after the fact, because I went down and met with the guys and, ended up joining with them, which is great. But after the fact, I was like, did you know I was looking for a band? And he was like, no, I just randomly reached out to you. And this is a guy who's a really cool guy. I've known him for like 6 years. We jammed together like 6 years ago, but the distance was too far for me to join the band then. So
Right.
now I live closer, so it's doable. But the time, again, it's like this guy didn't even know I was looking for a band, and he just randomly reached out to me. So again, it's like God going ahead of me and laying the groundwork and preparing things. And also, just another quick thing, which I didn't, I hadn't mentioned, but there was a band that my old band used to play shows with a lot. And I was wearing a shirt that said Jesus is God with a cross on it at a show that we played with them for another band. And this guy saw my shirt, and I didn't know he was a Christian. So he sort of, we became friends on Facebook, and he started liking my posts, which a lot of them are biblically based. And then one of the days where I was thinking about, like, this guy's a Christian, I'm a Christian, he plays guitar, I play bass. This is the second band now that I've joined since I left my other band. So basically 2 bands in 1 week, which is insane. I was able to join, because you can go through some real dry periods trying to find people. So I was like, I should really reach out to this guy. And I thought, well, I don't, I'm friends with his other drummer. And I'm like, I don't want him to think that I'm trying to steal his guitar player or anything, because that's not what I was trying to do. And then and he reached out to me and was like, hey, you want to start a band? And I'm like, yeah, and it's specifically, this is a Christian metal band, so he's like, I've always wanted to do that. That's what I want to do. And I'm like, well, that's always what I wanted to do as well, is have a really great Christian metal band. So, and I said, I didn't reach out to you because I didn't want you to think of, your band to think I was trying to steal you. And he's like, well, I didn't reach out to you because I didn't want your band to think I was trying to steal you. He's like, but when I saw you're no longer in your band, I'm like, I'm going to reach out to this guy. So him and I are also putting a band together. So again, it's the provision of, I felt God told me to leave my old band, now my ex band. And of course, with that, there's a lot of doubt, and you're wondering, okay, should I do this? Should I not do this? But it was very clear. God made it very clear, okay, it's time to move on. And within a week, I was in, a full functioning band that I'm learning the parts for their current album. And I've already started a second band, with my one friend who's also a Christian. He's a Christian, I'm a Christian. So I've always wanted to put together a Christian metal band. And he's like, okay, let's do it. So again, the timing, I mean, the one guy didn't even know I was looking for a band, and he reached out to me. The other guy, the same day that I thought about reaching out to him, but didn't, because of being worried that my friend, who is his drummer in his other band, would think, I was trying to steal him, which I wasn't. He reached out to me that evening. So again, it's just, like I said, I don't believe in coincidence, because the timing of things it's too perfect, and I think that's the way God works. I'm really big into apologetics, and I look at things like, how the balance in the universe has to be exactly perfect in order for the universe to even function, for life to exist on Earth. And, the Earth has to be perfect distance from the sun and the moon, and, in order for life to even exist. And that's why I say, when I look at those types of things and in everyday occurrences, to me, coincidence is ridiculous. It's like,
Tell us how you really feel, Shelby.
yeah, I mean, I just think God is truly orchestrating all things.
Right on.
I've seen that again and again. And a lot of times when people are, they're not Christians and they'll say, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. There's been times I've been like, well, that was God providing for you. And, I could see the light bulb kind of go on and like, well, maybe, but it plants a seed, and it makes people stop and think, okay, maybe so. Maybe things were too perfect.
I track with you on that. Well, one of the questions that we ask everybody, and longtime listeners know this one, we ask this of every guest, and that is, was it coincidence or God? And before you respond, you've clearly been talking about this, but we like to bring it to a nice little neat and tidy question. So give us your answer to that. Was it coincidence or was it God?
Well, to me, it's always God. It is. That's why, again, I think if you logically look at things and you can see how things can line up, for maybe at one point, if something one time happens in somebody's life, you're like, okay, coincidence. But if it's again and again, it's like you gotta try pretty hard to believe in coincidence, in my opinion. So yeah, I definitely believe it's God. That's why I tell people I don't believe in luck. I don't believe in coincidence.
Yep. Well, our last question is about the impact that, in this case, all of these stories have had on you. So tell us what that's like. What impact or how has your life changed based off of all of these stories and events?
Excuse me. It's deepened my faith so that if I get into a situation, no matter what it may be, where I don't know what to do, or where I don't know, what's going to happen, how I'm going to make ends meet or whatever it may be. The biggest thing is it's strengthened my faith to know that God is going to provide. One of the things that, again, he's told me over and over again is remember my track record. Like if you start doubting now, think about the times that I brought you through here and here and here and here. And I keep having to remind myself of that because I'm human. But it's just confirmation that he'll always provide. And it keeps me from getting too wrapped up in my own head with worry and fretting. And, it allows me to be able to, I'm naturally kind of, I get in my head and start spinning. That's just how I've always been. But it allows me to at least pull back from that and say, God has provided, who will provide. So just relax, So I go back to scripture, where he says, pray and don't worry. All things work for the good of those who love the Lord. And it's just deepened my faith that no matter what happens, he's going to bring me through it because he has again and again. And sometimes I need to hear that, because again, I'm human, we put on blinders and we just see what's in front of us at the moment. And you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Or what should I do? I don't know what to do, And, then I pray and then I reach out to people that God has put in my life that I trust. And then I just listen for what he says. And he always gets me through. He always helps me to make the right decisions. And if I do stumble in my own flesh and make the wrong decision, he gets me back on track. So.
Praise God, man. Well, Shelby, it's been a real pleasure having you on When You Look. You mentioned some other stories, so we'll look forward to having you back as a guest a second time, but it's been a real pleasure. So thanks a bunch. We'll talk soon. Thank
you so much for having me and, giving me the opportunity to give God the glory for what he's done for me.
Well, there you have it. Was it coincidence or God? You decide for yourself, but I believe you just heard a story for his glory. When You Look is powered by the stories that guests share. So if you have a story to tell, let us know by going to whenyoulook.com and click on Be a Guest, or click on the link in the description below. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, tell us what you think in the comments, and share it with somebody that will be impacted by the story. Thanks and God bless.